society organizations monitoring poverty eradication and gender equity around the world. We really appreciate the work of the Stiglitz Commission. We really appreciate this consultation and the opportunities that were given to civil society to participate. Many issues have been raised already, and one very important one was raised by the panel by the member of the Central Bank of Tanzania when he was talking about surveillance and who has the capacity and the mandate for the surveillance that could have avoided this crisis. You know, it reminded me of an episode several centuries ago in the peninsula of Anatolia. There was Nasreddin Hoxha, very wise man that was an advisor to the great ruler Timur-Lan. Now he's invited for dinner. He's asked, what do you think about the cabbage? And he said, oh, your cabbage is wonderful. I can only praise your cooks, Mr. Timur-Lan. And then Timur-Lan said, actually, I found the cabbage very bad. Oh, yes, you're right. The cabbage is rotten tonight, actually. So the ruler asked his advisor, you know, well, how has your mind changed so fast? And he said, well, I work for your excellency, and not for the cabbage. Now the institutions that should have warned about this crisis are in the same situation as Nasreddin Hoxha. They can and have the power to discipline economies of the small countries. But in spite of being populated with the brightest economists in the world, they didn't have the courage to tell to the rulers what was going wrong in the most powerful economy in the world. And that led us to this situation. So we really have to look at those mechanisms that can give the overview, the oversight, the independence from the rulers of the world. And that can only be in an institutional setting, like, for example, this one of the United Nations. The point was made, and we heard that expression also. We need a system where the tide lifts all boats. We were told that globalization would do that. Actually, what it is doing is having a Titanic effect, where the big boats are sinking. And what happened with the Titanic, for example, was that 95% of the women traveling in first class survived, but only 25% of the women traveling in third class survived the sinking of the Titanic. And probably that can be a good metaphor of this crisis, where the women in the world, the poor women in the world, are suffering the most, and they don't have the mechanism available to actually help them and to lift them up. It is essential, of course, that many of the big reforms are implemented. What is going to happen meanwhile? If we talk, and we have talked a lot in terms of metaphors for the economy, the trickle down, for example, when what we are seeing now is actually capital flowing upwards and not trickling down from developing countries for the poorest countries to the richest countries in the world. And that is definitely not admissible. And that has its origin in the kind of deregulation, as now seems to be common sense, that was preached on the developing countries for many, many years. One of the members of the Commission, Mr. Rubens Recupero, when he was head of UNCTAD, at the UNCTAD meeting in Sao Paulo, he was warning developing countries around the risk of opening up their capital accounts. And the expression he used was, to open up your capital accounts and liberalize your finances is like joining the mafia. It's a decision that you take and you join. If you then decide that it was not a good idea, you just don't send a resignation letter. Now, a lot of the deeper reforms that are being proposed may be the equivalent of destroying the casino economy that allows that kind of mafia to take the developing countries and the poorest in the world as hostage. But meanwhile, what we need really is a witness protection program for the poor and for the poor countries. And a witness protection program for the poor countries means that a lot of the capital controls have to be allowed for them to protect themselves. They have to be allowed to protect themselves against the increased protectionism by the richest countries in the world. They have to be allowed to protect themselves against the unfair competition of subsidized transnational banks. And they have to be allowed to stretch to the maximum the existing provision in WTO, for example, or even to go beyond that in the case of the emergency, because it is not only the powerful that should have that right to violate the rules at will. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. I now give the floor to the representative of China.
Thank you, Mr. President. First, I would like to thank all of our panelists